Hi, English 11 friends. So here's the thing. Now that we're done reading Walter's story, we're going to write an informational paragraph about it. This is one of the main standards that you're supposed to learn during 11th grade. So we're going to spend our time making this paragraph beautiful. We're going to spend time making sure you know all the components of an informational paragraph. And maybe later we can turn it into an informational essay, but right now we're just focusing on a paragraph. And really, this is the basic outline of the paragraph you're going to write. You're basically going to write an introduction that introduces the two texts that you're going to compare. In this case, it's going to be Just Mercy and the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution. Then you're going to introduce your thesis or your claim. And for this assignment, I'm going to give you your claim. It's going to be really simple. You're going to say that Walter did not receive his Sixth Amendment rights, and then you're going to prove it in your paragraph. So then next, the body of the paragraph is going to be you selecting two pieces of textual evidence, a fancy way of saying pull a quote from the book, and explain how each of those quotes proves that Walter's rights were violated, his Sixth Amendment rights, right? Then you're going to sum up your points, explain why this whole thing, it matters. It matters on a large scale. And then you're going to end it with a wonderful mic drop last line. That's the basic outline, right? And so if you don't want to get overwhelmed with this assignment, just stick with this basic outline and do that, right? But because I care and I want you to have all of the help that you need on this, I have gone through and broken down each of these big steps into clear, smaller steps so you know exactly what to do for every single line, right? So I'm going to take you through it piece by piece, but I'm not just going to talk you through it because I feel like that's boring. I'm going to write this paragraph and talk you through it as if I were a student doing this assignment, right? So with that in mind, let me open my document here. And for this document, I kind of feel like you're not going to be able to see it. So what I want to do is kind of, let's see, kind of zoom in so you can see this text well. And then even though it's supposed to be 12-point Times New Roman here on my document, I'm going to make it big just so you can see what I'm doing. But before I start, I want to remind you how to put a page number on a Word document. So all you do is you go into Insert, you go not to header, but to page number. And then when you click on it, it's going to give you some options of where the page number turns up. You're just going to choose the far right-hand side is where you want the page number. And I'm going to put my name in. And I'm going to ensure that my header is written not in Calibri, which is the default font, which is dumb. I'm going to put it in 12-point Times New Roman to make sure that it's all in the correct font, right? Then I'm going to write my header, my name, my teacher's name, awesome teacher, love her, and then my class name, my period, and the date in this format, day, month, year. Now here's the thing. I'm seeing that I have extra spaces between paragraphs. This is more than double spaced, and it's because every time you open a new Word document, it's going to put in default spaces, even more than double space. So what I'm going to do is highlight everything using Control A. And then I'm going to go into my spacing extra features here in this hidden special fancy menu box. And I see that I have 8 points after every time I push enter, which makes it more than double spacing. So I'm going to set that to 0. And then I'm going to click this box that says don't add space between paragraphs of the same style. And now it's all in double spaced font. So we're all set, right? So I know that I need to indent my first paragraph. I need to indent the first line of my paragraph. I'm going to put a title later. I've made a space saver there. But so the first thing I need to do is decide whether to discuss the speedy trial or the impartial jury portion of the Sixth Amendment. Now, I don't need to cover both. You're going to choose just speedy trial or impartial jury. You're not going to cover both. Now, me, for this example, I'm going to choose the secret third option that you're not able to choose. I'm just using the third option so your essay, your paragraph doesn't turn out exactly like mine. I'm going to use a different part of the Sixth Amendment, but you'll just follow the same process with just the impartial jury or the speedy trial. You don't have to do both. So you're supposed to find two pieces of evidence from the text. And if you want to know the page numbers for each piece of evidence, they're right here. For impartial jury, it's pages 57 through 59 and 64. For the speedy trial evidence is on page 60 and 64. That's where you're going to find your quotes. So I've chosen my 2 quotes from the text, and I'm going to be sure that I remember the page information. I'm going to remember that for informational paragraph, we only use the facts. We're only going to talk about the facts. My opinion is not welcome. So we're going to write in a formal third person. This is a formal paragraph. I'm going to use elevated language. I am not going to include my own personal opinion. I'm going to let the facts and the texts speak for me. And I'm going to just write so well that everybody's convinced about my take on this, even without my opinion being present. So first, we're going to start with this introduction. So basically, we need to briefly introduce the Sixth Amendment and briefly introduce just mercy. Now I'm going to be a rebel, and I'm going to introduce just mercy first because I feel like it's a better opening. You can do it in whatever order you want. So I'm going to introduce the author. His name is, and I have it in bigger text here just so you can see it, Bryan Stevenson. Now I'm using that a possessive apostrophe here because I'm going to say that it's his work, right? But we have to use the text type. We have to introduce the text type. And this isn't a novel because it's a true story. It's not a fictional account, right? So it's called a memoir, and you have to have the text type in there. So I say Bryan Stevenson's memoir, then I'm going to put a comma because I'm going to rename this for you. I'm going to use in a positive phrase, which is renaming this memoir. It's a fancy way of saying I'm just going to give the title of the text. So I'm going to just say Bryan Stevenson's memoir, Just Mercy. I'm going to follow it by a comma because the title, the way I've constructed this sentence, this title is an apositive interjectory phrase. So it needs a comma on both sides. Now that I've introduced the author, the type of text, and the text itself, then I'm going to give a brief summary of Walter's story, right? So I'm just going to be real simple and say Bryan Stevenson's memoir, Just Mercy, tells the story of a falsely convicted man named Walter McMillan. That's all we need. That's all that we need, right? Now I need to go and introduce the Sixth Amendment as a whole. So then I'm going to say, and this is how I'm going to type it. When I first introduce it, I'm going to give its full name. I'm going to say the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution. So we can't just say that it's the Sixth Amendment. You need to tell where it came from. The Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution, and I'm capitalizing all these things because the United States Constitution and the Sixth Amendment, they're all proper nouns, right? So this is how we would write that. The Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution, and it says here that I need to describe the right I am examining. Now you're going to choose speedy trial or impartial jury. I'm going to choose the notice of accusation, which you're not going to choose. I'm just using that as an example. I'm going to say the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution promises the right to notice of accusation. Now, people aren't going to know what that means, so I need to explain in my own words what that means without plagiarizing the definition, right? So my explanation is, which means that when arrested, an accused person must be told why they're being arrested. Now, in Walter's case, when he was arrested, they didn't really arrest him. They told him that he was arrested for a different crime than they actually convicted him of, which is a violation of his rights, right? So he wasn't told about his real accusation. So now I need to give evidence about this, right? So, oh, sorry, before I give evidence about this, I got ahead of myself. I have to write a clear thesis or a claim. It's just a sentence that explains what I plan to prove. And this claim is going to be that he did not receive his Sixth Amendment right? So here's how I'm going to frame my claim, right? I'm just simply going to say, Walter was not told the real reason for his arrest. So according to the Sixth Amendment, his rights were violated. That's my claim, right? Now I'm going to go and prove my claim in my part 2, the sandwiched evidence. I'm going to use quote sandwiches, which is a fancy way of saying I'm going to handle each quote appropriately using 3 important steps. And the first step is that I'm going to do the top bun of a quote sandwich, which is to give context. It's a fancy way of saying, tell me what was happening in the story and who is giving the quote. Then I'm going to give the meat of the quote sandwich, which means the quote, but I can't just give the quote itself. I have to cite that quote using an MLA citation that looks like this, and I have to punctuate it correctly, which we're going to talk about. And then for that quote, I need to do the bottom bun, which is the most important part of the quote sandwich. And it's basically me saying why that quote proves my point. I'm going to elaborate and explain how that evidence or that quote proves that Walter's rights were violated. So let's do that first step. I'm going to introduce my quote. I'm going to say what was happening in the book when the quote happened and who spoke or wrote the quote. So I'm going to say, this is my introduction, my top bun. When describing Macmillan's arrest, Stevenson stated, and after you've introduced the author, you only need to refer to them by their last name after that. So here's my introductory phrase, right? Stevenson stated, and now I'm going to give the quote exactly as it appears in the text. And I'm going to put that in quotation marks. And with very few exceptions, you're going to start the quotation with the capital letter. So here's the quote. There was no evidence against Walter Macmillan except that he was an African-American man. Maybe that was evidence enough. Now, you'll see that the quote is actually longer than this, but I cut out the part that I don't need to prove my point. And I replaced the part that I cut out with what's called an ellipses, which is a fancy way of saying 3 periods. But that just tells the reader that there's more to that quote, but I'm just showing the part that was the most important to me. Now, your quote is not done until you have cited it in MLA. It's never complete without citations. So here's how you do it. You leave the floor punctuation, which in this case in the text was a period. You leave that floor punctuation off and totally naked until you cite it. So you use the quotation marks at the end, leave the floor punctuation off, and I'm going to create my citation. It goes in parentheses. It's called a parenthetical citation, but really it's just a fancy way of saying the information is in parentheses. So I'm going to use the author's last name, and the page number that it came from was page number 31. Close my parentheses, and now the punctuation that came at the end of that quote, now I'm going to put it there after the citation. Now I'm done citing that quote. So my next step is the bottom bun. I need to explain why that quote proves my point. So first I'm going to say that this quote highlights the fact that Sheriff Tate, he didn't have any evidence. He did not have evidence. So how could he give notice of accusation about evidence that did not exist? So already Walter wasn't receiving his rights. So first I'm going to say this highlights the fact that Sheriff Tate had no actual evidence that Macmillan was guilty. And then I'm not going to leave it there. I'm going to tie it back into the 6th Amendment. And I'm going to say, if no evidence existed, then clearly Walter would never be able to truly receive his 6th Amendment right. Semicolon, check that out. There was no true accusation to notify him about. Technically, I'm trying to write like a student would. This technically is a grammar violation, putting this preposition at the end of a sentence, but we're just going to leave it because that's not what we're focusing on right now. It is sort of kind of fine. So I'm just going to leave it and be a normal person about it. But technically it should say there was no true accusation about which Walter could be notified, but we're not going to do that. Okay. So then now I'm done with my quote sandwich for the first quote. I'm done with that quote sandwich and I'm ready to move on to my next piece of evidence. I've proved that first part of my point. I've explained that evidence. Now I want to move on to my second piece of evidence, and I'm going to use a transition word or phrase here that helps the reader know that I'm moving on to a kind of a new idea within that paragraph. And I'm going to use my favorite transition. Furthermore, it makes me sound fancy, right? Furthermore, it makes me sound fancy. I'm fine with it. So furthermore, now I'm going to introduce my second piece of evidence. And I'm going to introduce what was happening in the story at the time, and then I'm going to say who wrote the quote. So I'm going to say Tate used Myers's fabricated sexual assault story. Remember when Ralph Myers weirdly accused Walter of sodomy, rape? A sexual assault story as a reason to arrest Walter when Tate actually arrested him for murder. So then I'm going to say who, that's my background, that's my context for the quote, that's my top bun. I'm going to say who said the quote, and then I'm going to give the quote exactly as it appears in the text. So the quote that Stevenson said was, I'm proving my point here with this quote. The quote that Stevenson said was, they hadn't yet investigated Macmillan, so they decided to arrest him on a minor pretextual charge while they built their bigger case. So that's Stevenson saying they arrested him for something that they didn't plan to charge him for. They planned to charge him with Rhonda's murder, but they didn't tell him about that, so that's a violation of his rights. Now, this quote is not finished until I put my citation in there, which is the author's last name and the page number that it came from in parentheses, and then whatever punctuation was here at the end of the quote, we're going to put it at the end of the citation. Now, I'm not done till we do the bottom bun here. The bottom bun is to explain why this quote proves my point. So here is my explanation. My explanation, it'll take me 2 sentences. It should probably take you 1 or 2 sentences to explain. So I said, Macmillan was not told that he was being arrested for murder. Walter was told he was being arrested for rape, even though Tate knew the rape charge was not factual. Because Tate did not tell Walter the true reason that he was being arrested, Walter's Sixth Amendment right to notice of accusation was not upheld. Oof. There we go. Now, I've sandwiched both of my pieces of evidence. I'm ready to move on to the conclusion of my paragraph, right? I'm going to then say, I'm going to restate my thesis. I'm going to restate my whole point here back from the beginning. I'm going to restate my claim. And I'm just restating it. You can't use the exact words that you used before, so I'm just going to rephrase it. And I'm going to say, clearly, Walter's Sixth Amendment right was violated. And then I'm supposed to make sure not to introduce new evidence here. I'm just going to tie all the information together. And I'm going to bring everything together with what we call in CE English, a so what, who cares? Tell me why I care. Tell the reader why they should care. I'm going to bring everything together with a final explanation of why readers should care about this whole story and why this matters to real people in real life. I'm going to try to end it with a mic drop ending that'll make it so nobody can contest what I said, right? So here is me saying why it matters to everyone, right? And I'm kind of just explaining that some might assume that one mistake in the criminal justice system is not important, but when one person's rights are violated, it means that everyone's rights can be violated. So I'm going to try to give myself a nice mic drop last line, try to understand and explain to people why they should care about this problem, why they should care about Walter's case, why it should matter to them. And so I'm going to say every citizen in the United States should stand up when even one American's rights are violated. So that's the end of my paragraph. And I'm going to double check before I submit. I'm going to double check that my margins are correct, my font is correct, everything's double spaced, no extra spaces between paragraphs. I have a heading, I have a page number. Oh, I need to write a unique title for my piece. Thank goodness I read this checklist and reminded myself. So the unique title for my piece, I'm going to say, I'm going to try to tie in my mic drop last line, and I'm going to call it violation for one is a violation for all. Ooh, I'm really happy with that. Ooh, I'm loving it. So remember that for your title, there's no punctuation after your title. It's not bolded. It's not underlined. You are simply capitalizing every important word in the title. That's important. So now I'm going to double check that I don't have any contractions in this. I'm going to double check that I haven't used any slang words or terms. I'm going to double check that at every opportunity I've been able to elevate my language in a way that shows the reader that this is formal. I'm formally writing here. And I'm going to double check this checklist to make sure I've done everything on this list. Now I'm confident that I've done everything here. I'm going to re-highlight everything. I'm going to double check that my font is Times New Roman 12 point. I'm going to double check that it's all double spaced with no extra spaces between paragraphs. I've got my title, I've got my heading, I've got my page number, I've got every part of the checklist, and I cited everything. I've capitalized all the proper nouns. I'm happy with what I have here. I'm happy with what I have here. I am ready to submit. So if your informational paragraph looks anything like this, you're all set to go. Thanks for watching this. I hope that you're able to, you feel confident in writing this informational paragraph for yourself. Okay, bye.